So welcome. The name of our session is how to provide meaningful feedback to, it should be ELL students in an online environment. And I'll explain the difference between ELL and ESL as we get into it. So my name is Kristina Otinel. Whoops. And I teach in the academic support. So if you went on the tour yesterday to where the tutoring centers are, I'm the director of the English Transition Center. And I work mainly with our international students face-to-face here. I've been teaching for 22 years. I started teaching in 1992. I went to South Korea, and back in those days, we were told if you can speak English, you can teach English. And so I just went off to South Korea and soon found that that wasn't really true. I had no background in teaching before in my undergraduate work. And after 3 years in Korea, I thought, wow, I could really travel the world and see the world by doing this, but I need to know how to do this. So I went back to the United States and got my master's of education with a focus in TESOL. And I've been teaching ever since. I've taught in 5 different countries. And I just came to BYU-Idaho in August. So this is my 3rd semester at BYU-Idaho, so I'm relatively new here. And at my last position, I was teaching in Alaska for the University of Alaska Fairbanks for the last 10 years. And we did a lot of I did mostly online teaching where I taught in Fairbanks and we went out remotely to the villages through online. So it's a little bit different than how BYU-Idaho is doing the online instruction in that it was synchronous. They could see me and hear me just like the webcam here can see me and hear me. But my students were mainly English language learners out in remote places. So that's a little bit about me. This is Sharie Adamson, and she's also one of our presenters today. You can go ahead and introduce yourself.
I'm here to help Kristina, passing out the handouts up here as well. So I'm Sharie Adamson, and I just work with BYU. I'm an online instructor for Pathway for a year, so I'm a complete newbie in many ways. I started teaching in the late 1980s, and I was a reading specialist at the elementary school level and taught ESL ongoing for about 10 years off and on. And right now I teach for Austin Community College. I live in Austin, Texas. And so my background is reading specialist, and we have a lot of EL learners that come into our developmental reading program too. And I recently have learned a lot about EL students because we, a year and a half ago, adopted one of our daughters from China, complete EL student, did not know a word of English at all. So I've been going through that process with her, and a lot of the ideas that are here that I'm going to be talking about have to do with how we've been helping her as well, especially in school. And especially teaching with Pathway, I teach the ELL courses, which we have students that are coming in with varieties of language backgrounds too. So my background again is reading specialist, and I have a doctoral degree in curriculum and instruction.
Great. So I've been here for 3 semesters, and last semester I started to put my English 107 course, which is a reading course, online. That will be piloting in the fall, and so I got to see how BYU-Idaho was putting together online courses and kind of what the role as a course lead was and what the role of my adjunct is going to be. And while I was developing that, online came to me and said, hey, we're having this conference, and the #1 question that the adjuncts have is how to work with English language learners. And so at first I thought that I would just give you tips on English language learners, and then I started to think more carefully about, okay, as a course or as an adjunct, you're not really able to adapt the content. The course lead is the one who creates that. And so a lot of your interaction with your students is at the feedback level. And so then I started thinking about the time involved in having a class of 30 students and the kind of feedback that you're going to need to give to your students. So I really thought that this presentation kind of needs to do 2 things. It needs to give you ideas on how to manage your time so that you have time to give directed feedback to your English language learners, and then you also need to know what are some of the special situations that English language learners have. So the English language learner part kind of comes in the middle because I want to talk about feedback in general and feedback online, and then talk about ways to save time and specific things that our ELL learners will need. So that's where I'm coming with it. So Grand Canyon University did a study and they asked 600 online adjunct professors, what instructional activities do you believe have the most impact on student learning? What do you think some of their responses might have been? Feedback? Okay.
In-class discussion.
Okay. So online in-class discussion might be discussion threads and so forth. So their number one answer was one-to-one interaction, and feedback was number 5. So it was a little bit farther down than what we expected. But then they asked the same 600, well, reflecting on your teaching, where do you spend your most time? What do you think their answer was?
Feedback.
The feedback, right? And so there was kind of a gap between what they felt was most important, or what would have the biggest impact is the one-on-one, and then the feedback is kind of farther down. So then they asked students the same kind of question, and they asked, you know, in your online classes, what's most important to you? And their number one answer was feedback. Even the feedback was higher than content. They felt that the feedback was the most important part for their satisfaction in the course. And so we know that feedback has to have a lot of things involved. It needs to be timely, it needs to be detailed, it needs to be specific. It needs to include outside resources sometimes. Sometimes our feedback needs to be actionable and it needs to be personable. And so there's a lot of things that we know we need to do in our feedback, and it's not that we don't know what to do, but we sometimes don't know how to do it, especially when you're 1 to maybe 30. 30 seems to be the average of what most online courses are, but some professors have had as many as 70 in their online courses. I don't know what BYU-Idaho's average, for my English class it's 20, which I think is below the average. It's usually, what are the size of your classes?
The pathway language classes cap at 30.
Mm-hmm. So anyway, one person to 30 is a lot. Sorry, did you say 60?
60 for sciences.
Okay.
And for some of the other ones, it's 45.
Right. So you're spread kind of thin. And so the challenge, of course, is time. How can we give timely, personalized feedbacks to our students that's going to help them? And so in my face-to-face classes, my students, they get a lot of things. They're engaged in the class. We have a personal connection. I might talk to them when I see them in the hallway or over in the cafeteria. They might come to my office when they have a problem. They can raise their hand in class and ask questions. We can play games in class to create motivation, and we can do group work, and we can do a lot of things in a face-to-face classroom that leads to satisfaction. But in the online classroom, students feel the majority of their satisfaction comes from their instructor's feedback. They're not getting all that other interaction that a face-to-face student has. And so our goal becomes, how can I make the greatest impact in the least amount of time? And so what do we need to do to ensure our students have the greatest impact, or feedback has the greatest impact? And they did a study of first-time online students, so not international students, but first-time online students. 20% didn't know where to find their teacher's feedback. And I learned just like you do for my face-to-face class. And just yesterday I was we're working on an APA paper, and I said, make sure you go back on the feedback and check what my feedback was to you so that you know what mistakes you've made and you can correct them. And my student's like, I have no idea where to see your feedback. And we're like 7 weeks into the course. You know, he's a freshman here at the university, so he didn't know, and he's not an international student. He's a regular American student. And so when we think about our international students who maybe have not even had the technology piece in their life before, I don't know how well BYU-Idaho orients students to online courses. But even so, I know that the way that I might give feedback to my students, where they find it and how they find it, might be different from course to course. And so one of the things that you can do to really help some of your international students, or all of your students, is help them find out at the beginning where they're going to look to find your feedback. And so our challenges in our feedback, there's lots of things that we need to do. And part of it has to do with timing. And we live in a world now where our students want feedback immediately. And there's some interesting studies out there. There was one study I was reading where they had a teacher who had 3 different classes. And at the beginning of the semester, the policy of the university was they should get feedback on their assignments within 7 days. And so she had 3 different sections. So one section she, from the very first day, gave feedback on the 7th day. And in the other section, she gave feedback on 2 or 3 days after they turned in their work. And then in the other section, she gave it within 24 hours. So the people who were getting feedback once a week, they were complaining, saying, I want my feedback faster. And the students in 2 to 3 days were saying, I want it faster. And the people who were getting feedback within 24 hours are saying, I want it faster. And in Grand Canyon University, they have professors who are online who work like 8 to 5. And they're like in a cubicle, and as soon as a student turns in a paper, they can give feedback. And those students also said, we want it faster. Or when they went and took another class where they needed it where they got feedback within 2 to 3 days, they were like, I'm unhappy, how come they're not giving me feedback as quickly? And so what we're learning is that no matter how fast you are with your feedback, they're gonna want it faster. And so what you need to do is explain to them what is realistic. Like, I'm teaching 3 sections, I have 85 students, and I will give you feedback within this amount of time, just so that they know what to expect. When we get into target, there's a lot of things that we need to do to give good feedback, but a lot of times we end up focusing on the learner and the task, and not so much some of these other aspects. And my brain just went blank on what I wanted to say here. So some of the things that students need to know is, like, they need to know how they've been progressing, where they have improved from week to week. I'm not always able to give that kind of information to a student, or how they are in relationship to their peers. Did you have a question?
I just had a question. It just occurred to me. Are we allowed to use things like SurveyMonkey so we can get feedback, like informal feedback from our students? Like, are you seeing my feedback? Yes or no? Are we allowed to do that?
Yeah, I do it.
That's a good idea. So they also need to know where they stand in relationship to peers. And so later in the presentation, we'll talk about some ideas on how to do that. And also, of course, what they've done well and what they need to continue to work on. So that's all in our target. And then in our nature, we want to give detailed, concrete feedback to our students, but a lot of what is good feedback is actionable, where they have to do something with it. And the problem with a lot of students, it just tends to be the culture of students, is they want to be spoon-fed the answer. And so they want you to correct it for them, and they don't want to have to necessarily go back and correct it for themselves. And so good feedback is you're going to give them the resource, like, your APA citations are not correct, here's the website where you can find it, please make sure that you resubmit it correctly next time. They don't really want to do that, but that is how we know they're going to learn, because students learn the best when they actually have to go and do something and make corrections. And so what we were, well, I'll go into it in a little bit, but what we were seeing here on campus is that a lot of our international students would come to the English Language Center for tutors, and they would want the tutors to correct all of their grammar. And so what would happen is we'd have professors who would be like, or feel that they were plagiarizing, because they would know the ability of the student in the classroom versus what this polished paper that was coming back with perfect grammar. And so we've kind of moved away from, we have definitely moved away from spoon feeding them the corrected grammatical sentences, and have been working on teaching them how to identify the errors, or we identify the errors for them and ask them to go and figure out how to fix it. And we'll talk about that a little bit more. Yeah.
Kristina, do you mind if I jump in real quick?
Sure.
On that last one, is since I'm teaching 106 ELL online, I'm noticing that with these learners, the EL learners, that you have to differentiate instruction. And the feedback has to be differentiated. So for example, some of my students are really at the low level. So when I give feedback on an essay, it will be very basic levels, such as a paragraph isn't necessarily just one sentence. You need to develop that paragraph. And so that's the differentiated feedback for those students. And then some other students, where I was grading their essays this week, that they are ready to go on and learn how to add a reference page. They're at that level. So with EL learners, I think we have the spectrum of students, and so making sure that we differentiate that feedback too, and providing students the resources if they're ready to move forward, because we don't want to necessarily hold them back with the others in the group. Does that make sense? Okay.
Right. And so differentiation, of course, makes more time. And so the result is that we feel overwhelmed as a professor. How are we going to give all this individual great feedback that I want to give, that I know my students need? How am I going to do it in a way that is sustainable, that I can continue to do from semester to semester?
I have a question. So are you, because usually one assignment a week, here I teach GS 120L. I try to, like, usually they're with vocabulary sentences. I go back and help them and rewrite their sentences and show them a correct format, because, and the other ones I try to give feedback of, try to, you need to capitalize I, you need to use a period, you need to do other things and give them the tools. But is it wrong to help correct a few sentences a week just to help them see the model of, this is what you were trying to say, this is what it should look like?
Right.
Model.
So yes, modeling is important, but you wouldn't be able to do it for every student for every single error that they're making. And so I'll make suggestions later on how to do it.
But modeling some is
Yes.
a helpful tool.
Yes, yes, yes.
Just usually if you convert, well, I've converted the lesson notes into a forum, and that's usually a place where we can go back and give examples and say, even separate from the actual content of that week's assignments, you can say, hey, a lot of people have been doing this and this and this with making this error. And then when you give them feedback individually, you can say, hey, see that thread in the forum and see if you can change your sentence structure to match that. Yeah.
Okay. Did you have a question?
I was just going to comment to that.
Okay.
I think that's a great idea. That you mentioned that, and it kind of sparks my brain. You could add little, maybe this is kind of what you already said, but you can just add little tips each week. It doesn't have to be what everybody's week on, but just some small tip, like you give us this resource here. We can just say pluralization. This is
Right.
small tip, but I don't know. Yeah.
So I'm going to get into it, but yeah, the good best practices for teaching English language learners is just to focus on 1 or 2 errors a week, that you're going to be consistent. Everybody, that like this week we're working on run-on sentences and fragments, and I'm going to be checking for that. And kind of, because if you do everything at once, it's just too overwhelming for you and for them. So the question comes, how do we provide feedback in an efficient and timely manner that is sustainable? And we want high quality feedback with the least amount of time investment. And so today I'm going to talk first a little bit about time management for in general, and then specifically for English language learners, what are some best practices that you can incorporate. And then we're going to show you some emerging technology and different approaches that can help not only one-on-one, but one-to-many. And so we'll go into all of those. So the first thing is you need to structure your teaching to focus on what you feel is most valuable. And they did another study where they asked online professors, when you go in, how much time do you spend a week on your class? And the average was about 1.5 to 2 hours per class per week. And then they said, okay, during that time, what are you doing? How are you structuring your time? Only 3% of professors could answer that. A lot of professors could tell what activities they were doing and what order of activities they were doing them in, but they weren't necessarily able to say, I spend 20 minutes on the discussion board, or I spend 5 minutes on announcements. They didn't know where they were spending their time. And I know I've been there, because when I taught at University of Alaska, I would pick the things that I like to do best first, like, I'll make an announcement, and I really don't want to grade those essays, I'll save that for last. And I wasn't really being efficient with my time and structuring it in a way that I knew that I was going to get faster with it. And so what they asked the professors to kind of outline what their activities are, and then allocate a time for it and stick with that time. So let me look at what some of the examples were. They said post announcements, answer emails, work on discussion board threads, create new content, record grades, and then give feedback. And so one professor, he allocated 5 minutes a week for announcements. And then when he came back, he said, I'm not really spending 5 minutes on my announcements. It takes me only like 2 minutes. And so what the online trainer said is spend 5 minutes on it. And so what he found was that he was now able to write better announcements. He was able to maybe link to outside resources or add a video to it. And so then when he created these really great announcements, he decided, well, I need to save these because I just spent this nice time creating these announcements. So he saved them. And then the next semester, it took him even less time. And so then what the online trainer said is, okay, now their second semester teaching this course, restructure your time. So now you don't need 5 minutes for announcements. You only need maybe 2 a week. And so now you can spend more time on the feedback section. And so what they're really suggesting as a strategy for you is really allocate your time, schedule your time exactly how much you're going to spend on each category, stick with it and get really good at it, and then save your work so that next semester when you reteach the course, you don't have to go through that same process. And so I thought that was a really great tip, even for my face-to-face classes and organizing how I spend my time when I'm working on administrative, like the grade book versus that. And so there's Pareto's Principle that 20% of your focus effort results in 80% of the results. So you want to stay focused on the 20% that matters. And so if I give myself 30 minutes to grade essays, one of my bad habits, and I'm sure I'm not the only one, is I end up clicking out and going like to Facebook or going click out and check my email, and I don't stay concentrated for those 30 minutes. And I've heard, I haven't actually found it yet, I think I need to do that, is find these programs that will lock down your computer so that you're only staying in your LMS or only on that web page for the 30 minutes, or create a timer. And that's how I got through a lot of essays, is I'd set a timer for 30 minutes. I like that tick, tick, tick sound, and then I'd focus on grading for 30 minutes. And then when the timer went off, then I would reward myself by go look at Facebook for 5 minutes, or I don't know, go get a piece of chocolate or something that would reward me. So if you're being more efficient with your time, you're going to have more time to give that individualized feedback, is what I'm wanting to let you know, because the feedback that our ELL learners need is very directive, very personal, and it takes a lot of time for you to create. So here's some of my tips on specific to ELL learners. So first of all, they're very diverse. And it's not what I expected 20 years ago when I started teaching. The typical international student was they already had a bachelor's degree in their native language, and they had passed the TOEFL with a 550 or better, and they were coming to work on graduate school. And those students still had problems with maybe writing and grammar, but it wasn't huge. It was very specific kind of things that they trained all ESL instructors in, and we kind of knew, okay, all students tend to have trouble with subject-verb agreement, so let's focus on that. And then after about 10 years, so I went and taught outside of the United States. I came back and I was an adjunct in the Boston area, and I started to see I had a lot more different kinds of students coming to college. They might have grown up in America, but they were in their community. They might, so like a Spanish-speaking community, so they spoke Spanish at home. At school, they would speak Spanish with their friends, but their classes were in English. And so when they got to community college, at the community college level, they still had a lot of issues with reading and writing. And so we started to see more of those students. And now a lot of universities have kind of an open policy, and we're no longer just waiting for students with a 550 or better in TOEFL. We're accepting almost any international student. And with the Pathway program, we are, students who have a high school education in their native country, but for example, I taught in the Marshall Islands, and high school education in the Marshall Islands is kind of similar to third grade here. So their ability to, have they ever written a paper in their own language? Have they ever had to do research? They haven't had those experiences. And now we're adding the technology part on too, where they've never necessarily even used a computer before. And so you have to realize that your students are diverse, and they're not just, you can't just pocket them and say all English language learners are going to have these problems. And so it really is worth your time to kind of get to know them and find out, how well have you used a computer? Have you ever written a paper in your own native language? Do you know what APA format is? Asking those kind of questions and really trying to get to know what their background is and where they're coming from. And not only are English language learners having these issues, but even Americans, we're seeing a lot more Americans coming out of high school, never having written a paper before or having a lot of difficulty with it. And so a lot of the courses that I teach here on campus are not just to international students, but we have a lot of Americans who have those same issues. But some things that are different is that other cultures have a different understanding of what good writing is. And so what really helps for them is to see models and examples. And so if you can post an example of what a good paper is for them, that's going to help go a long way, because they just, if I went to go and write a paper in Korean, I wouldn't necessarily know how it's supposed to be formatted, how I'm supposed to use references. It's going to be very different. So make sure that you show them what a good model paper looks like. Also, language of your assignments. So I think this is more when we're speaking, but it could also be when you're writing. If you wrote something like, I want your take on the subject, that's very colloquial. That's very how we talk, but it's not how somebody who's never really learned English is going to understand that expression. They're going to understand, I want your analysis better. So using less idiomatic kind of expressions or generalized and be very specific with how you word your assignment, and just be aware that some of the usage of our everyday talking is different for them. They're not going to necessarily know that. Different cultures have different rules on academic honesty. And so we need to make sure that your students know what is a summary, what is a paraphrase, what is quoting, how to do it. So just even they can get out of the pathway program and be into their major, but still not know how to do those things. So you need to take the time to teach that, feed forward to them. And then give examples of exactly what you expect. What's the purpose of the assignment? How long is it? What's the format? How are they using sources? How are they supposed to connect to the content? How do you want it organized? How are you going to evaluate it? Most students have no idea of any of these things. So if you can, the more models and examples that you can post somewhere for students to look at, the better they're going to be able to meet your criteria. Okay, so the biggest thing that professors, like I'll have upper level professors, my students don't know how to write. Our international students don't know how to write, and they're focused mainly on grammar, and they get tripped up on the grammar all the time. And that is kind of the first thing that teachers want to grade, is the grammar. And so best practices is that you should only comment on the grammar after you've looked at the organization and the content and given them some understanding of whether their ideas and the way that they're bringing in their sources and are they on track with that, because it's so much more than just can they write a basic sentence. Of course, if their grammar is so bad that you can't understand it, then they need a lot more remedial help. But a lot of professors, the knee-jerk reaction is correct the grammar, and they don't spend the time on the organization and the content. Yes.
So as I thought about that, it's brought up the dilemma for me, but how do I grade it on the rubric? Do I still dock them super low on the grammar portion because it is really bad, even though I'm focusing on the content and my feedback? And is that just going to frustrate the student that they got their lowest score in the grammar area, but I'm focusing on a different area?
Well, and so that's a good question, is has your course lead created a good rubric that includes grammar as a separate section? I've had students, I think most students realize that their grammar is not great, and so they don't feel bad if they've lost 10 points in grammar, but they've gotten high scores on organization and content and ideas. But I've seen a lot of rubrics that don't delineate it very clearly, and so then that makes it confusing for the student. Well, why did I only get a 50? And they don't know what. But I thought my ideas were really good. Or did you have something to add?
Well, just what I do sometimes is on the actual rubric themselves, so like on the grammar portion, you can put feedback right there.
about the grammar. But then on like the general feedback, that's where I talk about the content of what they wrote. Like on the rubric next to the grammar score, there's a link, like a place where you can put comments right there.
But is that too much? Is that too much feedback? Is that focusing on too many things? That's kind of my general question.
Well, I keep it brief on both. I think like if they get a 0 out of 10 on grammar, like most students are gonna wanna know why. Just because they don't understand.
Right, and we're
English
gonna
as
get
well as
into
us,
some
they're
of,
gonna wanna know why.
right, but correcting, I mean, if it's a
I don't
0 out of
correct
10, it's
everything.
very, very,
Yeah,
very
I'm
bad,
just
right?
saying, If
But-
they lose a lot of points,
Mhm.
then I think that there should be feedback explaining why.
Right, and I'll get into that in a second. So again, back to that spoon feeding part, the students want you to fix their sentences. And so what best practices say is give a lot of written comments on their organization and ideas, highlight the grammar errors for them. And I'll show you how you can do that.
Oh, yeah, show us.
And so this handout that I gave you is one way that we've moved toward that, in that, again, with my writing tutors, they wanted to basically rewrite their students' work, and that's kind of plagiarism. And so our department academic support, the English 106 professors and I got together and we talked about what are the major problems that ESL students have with grammar, and that's what most of these are. And then so in a face-to-face class, I can handwrite on their paper, right? So I'll just like circle the part that is subject-verb agreement and write SV maybe in the margin. And then the student can come to the tutor and say, I have SV, it means subject-verb agreement. Can you help me with this sentence? I'm not really sure what's wrong with it. And so what we do is we give our students this handout at the beginning of the semester so that they know these are the symbols. This is what the symbol means. This is an example of the problem, and this is how you correct it, or an example of how to correct it. And so in the face-to-face classroom, that works pretty well, right? Because I can write on their paper. You'll have to use Microsoft Office, and I'm going to show you how to use a feedback bank and how to leave comments on the paper. So, but keep this in your
Can I
mind.
ask a quick question? Does anyone know for Pathway, are they getting these tools at the gatherings?
Like these tools?
Something such
No.
as this, where they actually have a consistent tool that they're using to peer review papers?
We just created this last semester.
That would be a great idea if they had a tool like that at the gatherings. Maybe that's something that we can recommend that's consistent, so the peers can review papers, so the peers aren't correcting necessarily sentences for them. Since they're at the gatherings.
Right, and so we just started this here on campus last semester, and so it's brand new, and so I work with the 106 course lead as well, and so we've talked about how can we incorporate this into 106 and into our face-to-face classes.
So just to clarify, will the Writing Center tutors use this principle too if I send my students?
Right, that's what we're currently training the tutors. So last semester we created this. This semester we're training them, okay, you're not going to touch your students' sentences. They need to correct their sentences. But you can show them, okay, they have 10 subject-verb agreement errors on this assignment. So during the tutoring session, let's go over what is a subject-verb agreement error and have them correct their own sentences and return it to you. So there's 4 pages there, and it's not just only grammar. We have like repetition, and we tried to add in some organization, like you need a transition, you need a thesis statement, you need more supporting detail. So we added some of those onto there. And so what best practices say is instead of going through and using the symbol guide for all of their paper, it's going to take you forever to do that. Just focus on maybe 1 or 2 things per week. So this week, I'm going to focus on run-ons and fragments. If you have a run-on and a fragment, I'm going to mark it with the symbols on your paper, and then you need to go back and correct that. And then next week when you're grading, you see, oh, my ESL students, they have a lot of difficulty with subject-verb agreement. So this week, we're going to focus on subject-verb agreement. If you have a subject-verb agreement error in your paper, I'm going to highlight it for you. You need to fix it. Yeah.
Have you found that, because you've taught face-to-face and online environments, have you found that by just focusing on one or two grammar areas, it sends the message to the student that, you know what, grammar is important, but your content is more important?
Right.
And by have you noticed that? Have you heard the feedback that they've focused more on content than on grammar, or is
I guess that's
still...
my philosophy anyway, so I kind of always emphasize it, like, your ideas are important, but your writing is important too. It's
Because the reason I ask is because I find my students come to me and say, well, if I can just correct my grammar, I'll have good writing.
right.
So it's difficult to explain to them that the ideas are sometimes more important than the grammar difficulties, when in public education, often they focused purely on grammar and not on thesis statements.
It's easier to grade on that, you know, like as I'm thinking, it's easier for my GS120 students, it's easier to just fix their, you know, to help them with their grammar first, especially someone when you can't even understand what their content is supposed to be based on what they're saying.
Yeah.
And so all you can really do is focus on the grammar and hope once they can kind of figure out how to construct a sentence, then you'll be able to figure out what they're trying to say.
I think the students really get an idea of what you, the instructor, will focus on. So I've been an online student before, and I've had some instructors that APA format was #1. I didn't even really focus much on my content, is I wanted my APA to be perfect because I knew that's what they focused on.
Right.
And so if my APA was perfect in my paper, I knew that I would get 100. And so those online students know what the instructor focuses on. So they get the idea. If they know that your feedback is grammar related, they're going to focus on their grammar and not their ideas as much. But if right away out of the gate, you let them know, I will help you with 1 or 2 errors and focus on maybe the use of commas and introductory phrases or something such as that. But most important in content, you'll be amazed at how the students will really, really see. They really get the good sense as an online student what the focus is. And it's interesting how it's from instructor to instructor. You can see what their focus is right away. So.
And again, having a well-balanced rubric, for me, grammar is only one. So I do organization, support, coherence, which is the transitions, and then sentence skills. So it's only 1/4 of my whole rubric. And so they have to get the other 3 parts as well. Yes.
So at GS120L, I agree with what you're saying. However, it's hard to develop content when the grammar is so limited. And so students have trouble expressing themselves with their ideas, and they feel discouraged and I can't even write them down. So I think for me, and this is the first time teaching, so I have much experience for 120L, that I see, I'd rather have them focus on the grammar right now than the content. And I don't know how correct that is, if I should be changing that, but I don't see if they can even really express themselves because they don't know what they're, I have a handful like that, so.
They have to have, yeah, I agree with you, they have to have that foundation. If their grammar level is right here, you have to give them to at least here before you can even decipher what their content is supposed to be, or give them the tools that they can even express their content. But there has to be some, they have to get to some point where you can even address the content issue.
And I think the problem is beyond what I can even address. Like, I really feel we need some specific ESL courses for students before they start trying to take pathway programs and going into, but that's my opinion and we're not there yet, but I'll keep pushing from my end and you keep pushing from your end and we'll get there.
I think it's important that we compare both their comprehension ability with their expression ability and realize that expression is obviously going to come later.
Right. Yeah.
It's going to come after comprehension. And so, what are we trying to do in a GS120L class is help them obtain the awareness of how to learn online, how to, what the learning model is all about. And those are a million times more important than if they can even write a coherent sentence, because expression comes later. Right. Now, if they're comprehending during the course, then as they're exposed further during pathway, they're going to be able to develop those expression abilities. but you can't expect them to be able to express on coherently when their comprehension is just coming along.
Right, and when Online asked me to put this together, we weren't thinking only of pathway professors, but professors in the matriculated students who are online who are also having issues. So I'm kind of reaching out generally and going from there. So another issue besides the grammar is how we organize our writing in English. We have a very clear system where we introduce our idea in the introduction with our thesis, we support it, and then we say it again in the conclusion. And I've had a lot of students across the years saying, English is like a baby language. You say it, and then you say it, and then you say it again. And they get very frustrated because different cultures have different ways of looking at that. And they almost feel like sometimes we're talking down to the reader in a way. So for example, Russians tend to talk around the topic and they never get specific on it. And you're supposed to infer from it that is what they're talking about. Other cultures, just by citing a source is giving authority, and they don't need to share their opinion on what their thoughts of what the author was. That because I cited an expert in my paper, I've done what was supposed to, that's good academic writing. And so every culture has a little bit of different ways of doing it. And so what we need to do again is give models and kind of give them some more directed comments instead of saying, this section was really unclear. Give them some specifics, like you need more explanation, you need another example, you need to support your argument, and give them an example of that. They need more directed instead of just this section wasn't clear. Not because of grammar, but just because their logical way of organizing their writing isn't always clear. So that's something that we need to spend time on.
So can I ask a question?
Uh-huh.
What if we don't know ourselves? Is there a good, quick idiot's guide for help on how English writing is supposed to be?
Well, that one isn't. Yeah, that's not. I don't think that's what he was talking about. I thought how to organize a paper and how to support it and.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
Yeah.
So I got my degree in engineering and I got one in biology, and totally different writing styles. You have to support your arguments differently, and you put your concluding statements in different places. How do we know what standard is for these students so we can say you need more examples here, or here's where you should put your thesis statement?
Are you teaching an engineering class online or a biology class online?
I'm teaching a foundations course.
Oh, okay. So, because I was going to say when you're in your content, like your teacher education, is that correct? So she's going to know how the School of Education expresses themselves and what would be good writing. Foundational. John Langen is an excellent author on the patterns of English and how we support them. And so I would recommend any of John Langen's textbooks. Langen, Langan.
So yours isn't set up because ours tells exactly how they want our students to write the paper.
There's a couple of instructors. Yeah, so Purdue is excellent.
Resources.
Yes, and Purdue
OWL has, it's quick, easy references and they're blocked down so that.
And they even have PowerPoints to share with your students. This is what's expected. So Purdue OWL, write that down.
The BYU-Idaho Writing Center has online links.
They're organized.
And I'm going to share some of those with you guys in a minute. I hope. I got to. We have until 11:10. So let me speed up. So another big complaint I have, not from pathway instructors, but from instructors in the content area, is my students don't have critical thinking skills. They don't know how to think. And again, that can be very cultural. Okay. And so again, giving them examples of how, that you want them to go beyond just summarizing, but you want them to connect with the material. You want them to give a personal experience or an outside experience. And so in the developmental writing courses that I've taught, I spend a lot of time where I have students read an article, they write a 1-paragraph summary, and then separate from that is a 1-paragraph reflection. And beginning students have such a hard time with that, connecting with content. And so we need to give them a lot of practice and show them that that's what we're expecting in our education system. Okay, so there's a lot of things that we need to do. And to make it efficient, one thing I want to show you, a tool that I hope will help you, is a feedback bank. And hopefully my technology will work well. So when you're giving comments to students and you're spending a lot of time, you'll find that a lot of students will make the same kind of errors. And so I want to find a way to save my really great feedback and give it back to my students in a quick and efficient way so that I'm not rewriting the same thing 10 times. And so a feedback bank is going to help you organize, save, and reuse your feedback. And so there's some different technology that you can use. What I'm going to show you today is the autocorrect feature in Microsoft Word. If you have Windows or Mac, these are other programs that can do the same thing that I'm going to show you. But one of the other professors in my department said the downfall is that, like, when you're typing, it'll replace it all the time on your computer. So you might not want every single, like Facebook, to automatically, you're writing your post about your daughter and it automatically substitutes your feedback into the post because you used it here. So that's why I'm going to recommend Microsoft Word. So let me give you an example, and then I've created a feedback bank for you guys to come away with. So you go into your documents and say your students are writing a sentence. I don't know. I'm just putting anything there for now. Can you see that? Is it up? Yeah. I can make it bigger. Okay. And so then I like this feature. You go to review and you click on new comment. Have you used this before? Yes. Okay. So this kind of works with this symbol that I gave you, right? So then you could write right in there, subject verb agreement. You could type it as a code, or you could just write subject verb agreement error. And what you want to do is direct them to something. And so our Writing Center has great videos on writing. And so, you might want to add a link. So doing this individually is going to take you a lot of time. And so eventually you'll want to save it. And so what you could do is copy and paste this into like an Excel spreadsheet, but then you're copying and pasting all the time, and that can tend to take a lot of time as well. So what you can do is you go to Tools, and where is my autocorrect? And you go to autocorrect, and so you do this, the find and replace. And so I have created for you on your handout, there's a link to our ESL writing feedback bank. And basically I took the major issues that students might have, and I've created a code. So here's my code. It's RO. So what you would have to do on your computer is go over to Microsoft Word and then put replace RO with, and then I'm going to, if I can type in there, get back. You're going to go over here and you're going to paste this information here. This sentence contains a run-on, please revise, to review, watch, and I'm pointing you to the BYU Writing Center with the exact video that's going to go with it. So you're going to copy that, if I can, and you're going to paste that into your Word on your computer. And so replace. And so you're saving this and creating a feedback bank into your computer. And so now when I go over here and say this was a run-on sentence, I'm going to add a new comment, and I type RO. And there it is. And so you might want to make it a little bit nicer. So here it is. This sentence contains a run-on, please revise, to review, watch this video, here's a handout. And so that's going to save you a lot of time, right? For the individual feedback where you're going to point them. Yes? Yes, it's on this handout.
And you also, you have the link to it. So she has the link to it, so you can just copy and paste it.
So you'll have to copy and paste it into your Word. And you can.
So right on the back, right, Kristina? Here's the feedback bank. You can just go right to this link, and then you can just get the feedback bank right here, right? And
Right.
you can just copy and paste her comment.
So these are common ESL problems, grammar related. So let me show you some other things.
So once we get it set up once, then anytime we type RO, it's gonna.
Yeah, so that's why I was saying you don't want to put, you might not want Presto on your Mac, because then when you're typing RO in your Facebook page, then this is going to pop in. Okay, so
You can also put any easy symbol before RO,
That's just to define it.
so that when you're writing to Ron in capital letters, then it doesn't switch and put that in when you're typing in Word. But if you put asterisk RO as your code to replace, then when you write the feedback, you just put asterisk RO.
right,
You're done.
right. So you make your own symbol system that makes sense for
So
you.
you don't have it replacing things that you don't want replaced.
Does that get crowded though on the feedback? I mean, do you, like, let's say there's several of those errors or all types of different errors, and now as a student, I could imagine just looking at all of the same.
That's why you're going to go to 1 or 2 per assignment. This assignment, I'm looking for run-ons and fragments. The next assignment, I'm looking for subject-verb agreement. You don't want to correct everything for every student. Now, if you have native speakers mixed in, you might pop in other things that aren't just run-ons and, they have the odd spelling error. You could type that one in. But, yeah, you don't want to overwhelm your student, but you want to make it quick and fast for you so that you can spend time on other things that are going to be more directed and personable for your student. So, for example, she's teaching teacher ed. She can have, I don't know, what her very first assignment. So you can organize different spreadsheets for yourself based on different assignments. So assignment 1 has its own codes and feedback. Assignment 2 is, or you can have a spreadsheet vote based on APA style and codes that you want to have. And so you put all the codes into your Word, but then when it's time to grade, so next semester, so it's been a whole semester and you've forgotten the codes, you print out the Excel spreadsheet with the codes on it for you. And then when you get ready to sit down and grade, after a couple papers, it'll be really fast. You'll remember what those codes are. And so there's different kinds. You can have like content specific, like for teacher ed feedback for that assignment, that's content specific. Common errors that everyone has. You can focus on grammar, spelling, and writing style. It just depends on what discipline you have. So I gave you guys the ESL one, so yeah.
So my question as I look at this is, do you know what's more effective for an ELL student, to receive written feedback or to receive video feedback? Because, like, are they going to see that block of text and be like, that's small, that's weird, I don't know. Like, would it be more helpful for them to hear it, or do we talk too fast and the video feedback isn't efficient? Can they have general?
So I think you need to do both. Like in the beginning, we need to show them how to use this feedback, because they're not, you get your paper back and it has all these red boxes with links and you're not going to know what to do. So you need to teach them how to use the feedback. And then she's hopefully, if we don't run out of time, going to show you some other ways of using video feedback as well, because for some students, hearing and seeing it is going to be better than reading it. And so different students are going to need different things. So I guess the very brief things that you need to know about creating your feedback banks is that you need to make sure that your codes are really intuitive and specific for you, but not something that, when you're writing Ron, something else is going to pop up. And then allow it to use across courses and across students. And this Prezi, by the way, is also online for you. The link is there, so you can go back and review this.
Yeah, on the front page she's got.
And so your comments, you want them to be specific, detailed, action-oriented, integrate your resources. That's really good feedback, right? And hopefully that will free you up to give more personal feedback to other students. Okay, so go ahead from there.
So show me what you're clicking on.
I have just been using my arrow.
Just right there?
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Does the link include the software list? Your page that you use?
Oh, your spreadsheet, yes, on the very back, is that what you're asking? On the very back, there's another link. So on the front, there's one link to the Prezi, and on the back is actually the feedback link.
So the Prezi is all these slides that you've been seeing.
That's the bank, but you had a list of different software? Is that-
Yes, that'll be
That's
on the.
That's in the present.
It should be in the Prezi, yeah.
Okay,
Thank you for giving
sorry.
Well, I have nothing magical. I wish I did have something that great as a makeup thing, so that's great. So Kristina's done so much work, so she prepared all of this. So I'm just here just to share some ideas and to present. So one thing that I like to use in my courses, non-EL courses and courses that are EL courses that are really helpful is Feedforward. How many of you use Feedforward? Meaning that you anticipate what's going to be a challenge for the students and you post those resources and those announcements.
Yeah.
I have found that Feedforward so important. In fact, I almost find the Feedforward more vital than the feedback, because that will actually save time for you. If you provide Feedforward, and if you've got and you can actually differentiate and provide that to an individual student. I provide that with some online classes. I teach for Grand Canyon University actually, and I provide a Feedforward to the students. I will say, in a week, you're going to have this assignment, and this is what I expect. Here is the rubric, and this is what you might come across that might be a challenge for you. It really helps us with our grading too, because if we continuously do that, and we need to continuously post these. If we post them once and think the student sees it, it's not true. We have to send it email, keep posting it, keep posting friendly little reminders with a smiley face. Hey, don't forget to do this. And then say, oh, I get it now. Oftentimes as instructors, we make assumptions that the students know. I've made an assumption for the last year and a half that the daughter we adopted from China knows what a microwave is. The other day she pointed to me and she said, I'm going to cook it in there. I said, what is that? I don't know. We use it every day. We talk about it in our home, but she could not produce what the word was. She didn't even know what it was close to. She wanted to make something for Trek with elastic, and she said, do you have a stick for your wrist? And I had to differentiate. Okay, she wanted elastic for her waist, for something for her waist. So I assume that she knows these things, and oftentimes we can't assume that they know. So especially for our EL learners, if we provide Feedforward for them and anticipate what's going to learn. These are extra tips and suggestions, pitfalls and errors. Those are really important. Anticipate, look at the assignment. If you've taught the class before, you know what's going to trip up students. Really provide that Feedforward to them to let them know and focus on what you think is most important. Again, 1 or 2 errors in grammar that you think is important too. I don't think we'll have time for this example. Do you want me just to
But
move
you
forward?
can go to the Prezi, and this is an example of a teacher who's doing the Feedforward, but she posted it, videotaped it in YouTube, and just provides the link for this.
A model. So for example, you could actually post at YouTube or a screencast of a model paper. And if you know students in your course are really having a tough time with a thesis statement, then you can post that Feedforward and say, hey, here's a great example. This is what I'm really looking for, because these EL learners, they need models. They need to see a model, not necessarily correction, but model. And there's a difference between correction and a difference between model. For example, my brother is great at speaking Mandarin. He speaks multiple languages. And whenever I say something, even a name in Mandarin, I am afraid because he corrects me all the time. So you know what I've done? I've shut down and I don't say anything, even a name of a person in Mandarin, because he's oftentimes corrected me. And I don't think he realizes it, but I have actually shut down and I don't say anything at all, because I know that he is very good at that. Our students may see us as that. They may see us as models, and they're afraid. They're afraid. They want to please us. That is very common, is they want to please us and they want to see that. So if we can do modeling instead of correcting as much as possible. And when we provide feedback, if we provide feedback to a screencast, we can actually, instead of saying, now I saw that you didn't put a comma here, instead of saying that, we can say, I like to add a comma between, or we should always add a comma between 2 complete sentences when we add a conjunction. Something like that, instead of saying, I noticed you didn't do that. Instead of saying, this is the rule that we follow in English, or this is something that I do when I write my papers. So see the difference between those, and I'm sure we all know that too. One-to-many, just create generalized feedback. Often that is safer than personalized feedback. Students get really nervous. Have you ever been an online student before? And of course, we've been face-to-face students. It is so nerve-wracking to get an assignment back.
I remember the first couple of assignments I had when I was an online student, I actually had a stomach ache. I was nervous and churning, and I was afraid. So if we can give that generalized feed forward in an informal setting in our notes, or, hey, this is what I'm really looking for, then that student may say, hey, I am not doing that. I better do that. It's a safer environment to get that feedback.
And so also at the end, instead of giving every student individualized feedback, but kind of at the end of an assignment say, hey, this is, this is how everyone generally did. And that helps students because that's where they can make that informal social comparison. Because when I'm in class, I know like where I kind of stand and is everyone making the same mistake as me? But like when you're just getting one paper back from your professor, your stomach's turning and oh, I'm so stupid, look at all these errors. And you have no idea that everybody else in the class had the same problem. So that's why one-to-many feedback at the end is also very helpful because then they can kind of be reflective of their own learning. Oh, this is where I didn't make that mistake, but I did make this mistake. And they can kind of see where they fit in.
I think that's so important because they need to have that social comparison. So if we provide that general feedback, and we can always, I think it's a good practice to always do a wrap up in our announcements, a wrap up and say, this is something that I'd like everyone to work on. Or even in a screencast, I'll mention to them, I've noticed that many of the students in the class have had an issue with the thesis statement, or they really need to see that social comparison because I think they feel a lot better that it's not just them, they're not singled out because of that feedback as well. Again, just here's some examples. You may want to add a YouTube video or some sort of reference. And again, just providing that to general students.
Just a question, what recommendations do you have for screencast software?
That's coming up.
Oh,
That's coming up?
Yeah.
Okay.
I personally, yes, that's right. It's towards the end. I use Jing personally, but again, Screenomatic, and there's a slide in here. So again, peer-to-peer, you can provide opportunities, and probably many of you do that. You might want to turn your notes from instructor page into a discussion board, and the students can share their essays with one another. However, some of these students, they don't know how to provide feedback. They really don't know what to say. They'll just say, good job. Yeah. Many of them don't know what to look for, so maybe we could teach them that. Maybe we could actually send a screencast to them and say, these are some of the comments you might want to make with your peers. I think that would help them with the gathering. A lot of the students mentioned to me that they really don't understand how to provide feedback or get feedback at the gathering. So maybe this is something that we really need to think about adding to our courses to help. Some peer feedback ideas, just make evaluative comments, give comments in a piece of written work. Maybe we can ask the students to provide feedback in the reading discussion boards also. I oftentimes will ask them, this week in the discussion board, when you respond to your peers, ask a question. Let's provide feedback in that way. So that's something that will help. We can use multimedia, we can use screencasts, we can use so many ways that we can provide feedback that's a little bit novel rather than just the typical track changes in a document. So, and again, I apologize, I'm going quickly because I know we have to end to get to your next session. There's some great tools. Now, some of these I have not used before. Kristina, tell them which ones you've used.
So VoiceThread. So VoiceThread is kind of cool because you can upload like your PowerPoint or your slides or even a model paper. And then students are able to comment in different ways. They can use their mic or their telephone. They can like make a little text, like their picture will show up and they can write a little text comment next to it, or they can leave an audio file or a video file. So there's lots of ways for them to interact with that slide. There is a cost for VoiceThread. It's not free. But a lot of students have enjoyed using it just because they have different ways of interacting.
I've heard of Audacity. I've seen it used, but I haven't used it myself personally in the classroom. So that might be something.
Yeah, this is just an audio recorder. There's no video. So you could be talking about somebody's paper. They can't actually see where you're talking. It's not a screencast, but they can just hear your comments.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then here, YouTube or iJot. I haven't used iJot. Has anyone used that before? That's a new source.
So iJot is interesting, but it can get overwhelming quick. You can leave feedback for your student. It's audio or video. It's video, and then ask them to respond. So you might ask them, in your response, tell me what's the first thing the first change you're going to make, and then they'll leave a little video explaining what they're going to do next. But students tend to really love this. And so what you'll have is they'll be asking you lots and lots of questions. So it can get overwhelming for you. So you need to kind of lock it down into exactly how you're going to use it with your students.
Also, depending on where your students are, there could be bandwidth issues.
Mm-hmm. Good point. Screenomatic, I've used that one, and Jing, I use Jing typically, both, but these are great ways to provide feedback too. I also think it's important for EL learners to also provide some written feedback too in those rubrics where we grade. That's really important because I know that they might not understand us when we're speaking in the screencast. Even if we're speaking slowly, they might want to review it. And I know with my daughter as an EL learner, she likes to see the written form. It's easier for her than to listen, because oftentimes listening, you blend words and you really don't understand what was said, but she focuses on the reading portion of it. So I think it's important if we use these that we use both too. And here's another example. This is fun, Voki. I've used that before. Have you created that? It's your voice, and it's like a little animated person, and you can decorate the animated person. If you,
It's a fun one to do, like.
it is fun. Yeah, if you want to give directions, just something fun to bring fun or spice into your class.
Is it like a video? Or?
Yeah, it's like you create a person and you can dress the person. It's animated. And I went to a middle school open house, and the middle school teacher spoke to parents that way. She didn't even speak. She let her Voki speak. It was so cute. It was dressed as a cowgirl. And she had it on the screen, and she didn't speak. The Voki spoke for her, and we left just laughing. And it was very fun. A great simple way to get across your information. Yeah, free to use.
So is it like, because some Voki's can, or some avatars can be embedded in text. So is it something they click and then they see the presentation?
They can just,
So you can do it like a, a PowerPoint, and a little Voki talk says like through your PowerPoint.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's really cute. Is you can just, yeah, you can embed it in a PowerPoint or something like that, or a Prezi, something like that. So all right, well, I think we got under the wire.
Conclusion, just try to be efficient in giving your feedback in timely, directed manner, and there's lots of technology that can help us do that.
That was great.
If you need any